All right, part two on Reagan. So, Reagan was a two-term president. He runs for election in 1984. By 1984, the economy is starting to improve, right? And this is after the economy was real bad for most of Nixon's presidency, for all of Ford's presidency, and for all of Carter's, right? So this is a big, big deal that the economy is starting to improve. Add to that Reagan was by far the most charismatic conservative politician to ever run for president in our American history, right? He was a great campaigner. The economy is getting better, right? And there was really no chance for Walter Mondale or Geraldine Ferraro to win the election against him. Important to note, this is the first time we had a female on the ticket of a major party. Geraldine Ferraro running as vice president. We did have multiple women run on smaller party campaigns to try and become president, but this is the first major party to put a female on the ticket. Reagan's going to win in a huge landslide. 525 to 13 on the electoral vote. Mondale only wins his native state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Absolute blowout. We don't see lots of we don't see blowouts like this. We haven't seen one since. So, Cold War. Obviously, the Cold War is going to be a big part of the Reagan legacy. He will be the second to last president of the Cold War. He often gets credit for ending it, which I think is a little bit too much, right? We like to celebrate our leaders and stuff like that. There were lots of people in the Soviet Union trying to end the Cold War. And then, of course, more important than that, outside factors, right? We don't control everything, right? Our president doesn't control anything. We as a country don't control everything. All sorts of things happen to end the Cold War, but we like to take credit for it all. Reagan will use extremely harsh rhetoric to define the Soviet enemy, and we still use that rhetoric to this day. Both Democrats and Republicans talk about how dangerous Russia is. Russia, Russia, Russia. The Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars program, was a big part of Reagan's push during the Cold War, which was a missile defense system made up of satellites that would shoot missiles out of space. They would shoot lasers or rockets from space that would shoot missiles out of space. It is just as ridiculous as it sounds. It was ridiculed by scientists at the time as impossible, and it'll end up costing us billions and billions and billions of dollars for basically nothing. We still have the same issue as we did back then. I'll click to it now, and then we'll go to the Korean airliner thing in a second. So this is what the Star Wars program was supposed to look. Got all these satellites up there, and they're going to send codes, and they're going to shoot missiles down, and all this and that. Problem is, if we were really going to go to war with the Soviet Union or China or whoever, right? They wouldn't just send one missile at us, right? They would shoot hundreds, and we don't have the capacity to shoot down hundreds of missiles, right? We didn't then, we don't now. Nobody does now. Israel's well regarded for having a very strong missile shield program or something. And even that, right? If they were actually to go to war with a country and a country sent 100 missiles at them at the same time, Israel can only intercept a certain amount of those, so damage is still going to get done, right? The Korean airline 007. So, Korean commercial jet carrying hundreds of civilians, including Americans, was shot down by the Soviets after it mistakenly entered Soviet airspace. We will use this to break off arms control negotiations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And Reagan will give a very famous speech where he will call the Soviet Union the evil empire, right? That they are the focus of all evil in the modern world because they shot down an airliner. We will talk more about an Iranian airliner that we shot down. I will give the Soviet Union credit is that they did apologize for doing this, but they did kill lots and lots of innocent people. So, the Strategic Defense Initiative, or the Star Wars program, did two of these things. A, cost billions of dollars. B, was supported by science. C, was ultimately unsuccessful. Or D, is still in place today. All right. More Cold War stuff. The nuclear buildup. We talked about how a big part of the Cold War was the arms race. Reagan, again, will put the arms race on steroids. He will constantly and knowingly lie to the American people, to the Senate, and to the Congress about how many nuclear weapons the Soviets had. Why would he do that? Because he wanted more money in the budget to build more nukes. He lied about our military size and preparedness so that he could get more defense and military money in the budget. This is not just a Reagan thing. Every president does this. I will say, probably, Obama maybe didn't do it as much, right? Trump certainly has. But it's not like we've decreased military spending, right? Military spending has basically been at record highs every single year since 1981. So it's not like we're not spending all that money. But they like to lie and say, well, we're not prepared to defend us in this situation or that situation or whatever, so that we can get more money in the budget for defense. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes the leader of the Soviet Union in 1985. He very much wanted to end the Cold War. He was a reformer. He called for free speech, economic reforms, and some democratic reforms in the Soviet Union. Call it his Glasnost program. Some of that was really good. Some of it still wasn't up to Western standards, but he should get more credit for trying to bring an end to the Cold War. He personally calls Reagan and says, hey, Reagan, if you'll get rid of your Star Wars system, we'll get rid of some of our nukes, right? He also said we could ban all nukes, right? We came very close. The INF, the International Nuclear, what does F mean? Anyways, the INF Treaty, we got close to signing an agreement that would ban all new nuclear building by the United States and the Soviet Union. But Reagan wouldn't sign on because if he signed on, he had to publicly get rid of his Star Wars defense program. So we just settled, instead of getting rid of all nukes, we just banned intermediate range nuclear missiles. Anyways, there's Reagan and Gorbachev. They actually became pretty good friends, considering all the bellicose things they said about each other in the press, but they got along pretty well. So, true or false, Reagan was truthful with the American people concerning our military and the Soviet nuclear arsenal. Is that true? Is that false? I said that every president lies about our military stuff and our preparedness and all that sort of thing. Go ahead and Google right now how many countries we have troops in there. How many countries we have active troops, how many countries we have active bases. And then tell me how many presidents actually told you where our troops are. Right? Not just picking on Reagan. It's all of them. So, the fall of the Soviet Union. Okay, the Soviet economy could not keep up with ours. Okay, there was a lot that goes into this. Generally, people will say that the United States outspent the Soviets, and that's the only reason that the Cold War ended. That's not entirely true, right? What is true is that the Soviet economy was not as strong as ours, and a big part of that is that while the U.S. Was pushing all sorts of deregulatory capitalism and all of our sort of things that under Reagan trickled down and all that, the Soviets not only had to try to compete with that, but they had to maintain dominance over all their satellite countries, all those countries that they took over in Eastern Europe. So they're devoting a lot of money to that, and they also super overinvest in their military, allowing other sectors to fall apart. The big difference between their economy and ours is that both of us overinvested in the military, but our economy was resilient enough, or strong enough, I should say, to allow us to still invest in other sectors. The Soviets really couldn't. Another big part of this that I don't have a bullet point for, but I just read a book on the Soviet Union and on their nuclear calamity at Chernobyl, was that the Soviet Union and their bureaucracy, the way that they structured their government, they refused to admit any mistakes and go back and fix things, and that led to a lot of breakdowns. They weren't as good technologically as us at a lot of things. And instead of admitting that and trying to fix it and change things, they refused, and they just tried to weather the storm, and that didn't work out. Starting in the year 1989, many countries pushed for their independence, including Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Romania, all in the same year. They all declare their independence, and Gorbachev will refuse to send troops to keep them in line, so they all get to be independent again. In the year 1990, the Berlin Wall will be torn down, and that same year, Germany will be reunified. This happens under the first President Bush. The official fall of the Soviet Union will be on Christmas Day of 1991. Then it becomes the Russian Federation, which it still kind of is today. So, fall of the Soviet Union, this picture on the left is a statue of Vladimir Lenin, who was one of the leaders of the Soviet Revolution during World War I. They tore his statue down. I'm not sure what country that's in. On the right, that is in Berlin. That's them tearing down the Berlin Wall, part of the Berlin Wall, I should say. So in what year was Germany reunified? 1989, 1990, 1991, or 1992? All right, foreign policy. Reagan, very, very much a militaristic guy, foreign policy-wise, right? America generally is a very militaristic country. We like to pretend maybe that we're not, but almost every day that we've been an independent country, we've been at war or been involved with killing abroad somewhere. That's just how we've been, through every president, through every party, through everything. Reagan himself will send Marines to Lebanon in 1983 as part of an international peacekeeping force. We put those Marines, stupidly, in a hotel that wasn't very easy to defend. A suicide bomber will attack that hotel, and 241 Marines will die in the explosion. We will then pull troops out of Lebanon. We will bomb Libya in 1986 in retaliation for an alleged Libyan-sponsored bombing in West Berlin, which turned out to probably not be Libyan-sponsored, but we still bombed Libya for it. The Iran-Iraq War. Iran and Iraq went to war in 1980. We will back Iraq, but we will also do some other stuff with Iran, which I'm going to get to here in a second. So we gave Saddam Hussein millions of dollars worth of weapons. We gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons, and he will shoot those chemical weapons into Iran and kill lots of Iranian people. We will never apologize for that. There's a reason why a lot of people in the Middle East don't like us. Then we will shoot down an Iranian air flight, right? It was a passenger flight. It was not a military flight. It was a commercial flight, and we shoot it down. We killed 290 people, including 65 children, and you know what? We never apologized. So this is during the same time that Reagan's going to go on TV, he's going to give this big speech and say that the Soviet Union is the source of all evil in the world because they shot down an innocent commercial plane, and then we're going to do the same damn thing, and we're not going to apologize. They will ask Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, as he's running for president in '88, if he'll apologize, and he'll say, no, I'll never apologize for America, even if we kill 65 innocent children or 290 innocent people on an airline. I'm trying to get at there. We're not very good about being accountable as well. We will send military advisors to El Salvador under Reagan to help prop up the oppressive government there. Their government was not good. It was right-wing, almost dictatorial, and they killed anybody who they did not like. People in El Salvador were ready to rise up and overthrow the government, but we liked the guy leading the Salvadoran government, so we sent troops to help. We trained their troops, okay? Those troops that we trained then became roaming death squads that killed thousands and thousands and thousands of people in El Salvador, including 3 American missionary women, or 4 of them, that were raped and killed, but we didn't withdraw any support to El Salvador after that. In 1983, right after the Lebanon bombing, we'll send 6,000 troops to Grenada because there had been a military coup that put a Marxist, a communist in charge. Grenada's tiny. There's not very many people there. It is not in any way strategically important to us, but a lot of people saw this as an easy win, so we sent 6,000 troops there to take out the Marxist government. To be fair, at least to Reagan, what we did not know at the time is that a lot of the people in charge in Grenada weren't very good, so this might not have been the worst decision of his military stuff. Bad decision by him, but it's not just him, this bottom bullet point. It starts under President Ford and goes all the way through President Clinton, but he will support the oppressive Suharto government in Indonesia. Why do I call them oppressive? Because they invaded this place called East Timor and killed at least 250,000 people. Just murdered them, just killed them, because they were trying to become an independent East Timor. So we continue to support them, right? Why I put this under Reagan is that it became an international news item under Reagan that Suharto was killing innocent people, but we continued to support it. I would again like to point out this is not just a Reagan thing. Every American president since World War II at the very least, probably since ever, has supported bad people in other countries as long as those bad people did things that America liked, mainly business things where we could make money, right? We could push our businesses to their countries. It's not just Reagan, it's basically every president. So, there's Ronald and Nancy Reagan there on the right, looking at the coffins of the Marines that were killed in Beirut, Lebanon. So how many Marines were killed in Lebanon? 176, 213, 241, or 308? Back-to-back questions. We gave millions of dollars worth of aid, weapons, and chemical weapons to Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. Is that true or is that false? All right, this gets us to the Iran-Contra affair, which probably should have ended with Reagan getting impeached, but it doesn't. So, in Nicaragua, there had been a socialist government, was elected. They were called the Sandinistas, but they started getting support from Cuba, right? We still didn't like Cuba, right? Cuba's communist. We can't trust them to do anything. Reagan will accuse the Sandinistas of trying to turn Nicaragua into a base for the Soviets and the Cubans to send their troops to and then eventually attack Central America. So, there was an opposition force, the Contras, who wanted to overthrow the Sandinista government. They received money from the United States, and we will also help them mine harbors, which is against international laws. Putting floating landmines in the water of a harbor is against international law. Anyways, but we could not give them money directly. The reason for that was because the government, the Congress and the Senate passed laws telling Reagan literally, you cannot give money to the Contras. Right? Said there cannot be any American aid to the Contras. The Senate and the Congress passed a law that said that. So Reagan and his team really wants to still give money to the Contras, so what do they decide to do? They're going to sell weapons to Iran. But it's going to go through Israel, because at this point we're still not super good with Iran. So we are going to trade weapons to Israel. Israel's going to sell them to Iran, and then they're going to give that money back to us. This is super, super illegal. It's against international law to sell weapons in what they call a third-party transaction, which means somebody else is involved, right? If we just sold weapons to Iran, that's fine, right? That's a two-party deal, right? It's us and them. But if you have a third person in there, a middleman, it is illegal at the country level. Israel at this point was getting along with Iran. They are not friends anymore. Reagan claims he has no idea what's going on in this when it becomes public knowledge. It's obvious that he did know, okay? Others took the fall for him. The country at this point was not willing or possibly strong enough to endure another impeachment, which I think is ridiculous. I think mostly people were scared to take on Reagan because he was so popular. So Reagan was forced to admit that weapons were funneled to Iran in an effort to free some hostages there, which isn't really what the effort was. That was really them just trying to cover it up, that they were trying to overthrow a government in South America. So, Reagan's secret dealings with Iran. So, the CIA sends surplus and excess weapons to Israel. Israel then sells them to Iran. Iran purchases them at high prices. That money gets put into a slush fund bank account for the CIA, a secret bank account, which then gets funneled to the Contras in Nicaragua. This eventually all gets unearthed, but under the next president, okay, George H.W. Bush, and his Attorney General, Bill Barr, who's the Attorney General right now, they preemptively pardoned everybody involved in it so that the investigation could not actually happen. So, the Iran-Contra affair involved the United States and what other countries? There's three correct answers. A, Nicaragua, B, Israel, C, Lebanon, or D, Iran. All right, election of 1988, which means Reagan's done. His Vice President Bush will beat Dukakis, the Democrat. Reagan's still pretty popular. Bush had been his VP. It seemed like things were going pretty well for those 8 years. There wasn't a great chance for Dukakis, and Bush is going to win in a landslide, but this will be the only election that he wins. So, we talk about Reagan's legacy. I think it helped push both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party more to the right on most issues. Will also increase deficit spending in American politics to a very, very high level, which we continue to do now through every other presidency. So that's it. That's Reagan. We will continue on with this guy here in the bottom left there, George Herbert Walker Bush, the next time I record a lecture.